Lake Mungo is probably one of the earliest found footage films I was exposed to. And instantly I want to clarify that much like Searching, a film that I touched upon in the introduction last week, Lake Mungo isn't a film that utilises very common found footage elements. Lake Mungo is a 2008 psychological horror film helmed by writer and director Joel Anderson, and it utilises a mockumentary style with its storytelling whilst also using a mix of found footage and docufiction to really enhance the experience. You know what, I'm just going to say it right now. To me, Lake Mungo is still the found footage film that uses such a grounded nature with its storytelling that it leaves you pondering whether or not what you're watching is real. Now this comes down to how this film chooses to engage within the narrative. It feels incredibly grounded, and after my first viewing genuinely did leave me asking, did that really just happen? And you know what, I believe that's an entirely reasonable question for someone watching this movie for the first time to have. We're living in the midst of an age where Netflix is consistently producing documentaries with the exact same feel that Lake Mungo has, which is only going to further cause it to blend that line between fact and fiction. When it comes down to asking the question of what Lake Mungo is, I feel that the writer and director Joel Anderson described it best. He's on record saying the following when asked about his inspiration for the film. I don't think it's a supernatural thriller, I think it's meant to be an exploration of grief. And you know what, this sentiment definitely rings true with the film. The actors in it play a family in the middle of an interview process regarding something so real and common in this world that many families have unfortunately had to live through. The incident in question is the death of their daughter Alice and the potential supernatural events that the family experience in the shadow of that event. The people behind Lake Mungo went a very smart route with the casting, choosing to go with actors that would be completely unrecognisable to the public. This helps further sell the authentic nature that Lake Mungo is trying to conjure. Because for obvious reasons, if we were seeing, Jake Gyllenhaal playing the father here, it's immediately going to break immersion because we know that's not real. Also see, for example, if Blair Witch had cast someone like Neve Campbell to play the main character in that film, instantly we would realise it's not real, making unknown faces, especially in a film like this, the far superior choice. On top of that, the characters are literally just ordinary people. There's no defining trait that each of them has that makes them distinct or unique. They're just people living their lives, which does wonders in terms of making us connect with them on a human level. One thing I like about this movie a lot is the lack of a real script. In order to maintain the genuine sensation of a family trying to navigate their feelings, all that the actors had to work with was the outline of the story. There was no written dialogue, meaning that they had to improvise much, if not all of what they were saying. I always love seeing that parts of movies that I love are improvised, so you can imagine how much I loved it to see that most of this movie was. Like, aside from the skeleton of a script, this thing is almost entirely done off of improvisation, and that makes me love this movie so much more. The lack of a real body to the script enhances the experience so much. Any moment where an actor's looking at us and they're struggling for something to say is followed quickly by the realization from us as an audience that they are. These are genuine performances, they're facades in the barest degree possible. And Joel Anderson actually got to pilot this firsthand because not only does he direct and write the film, he also stars in it, playing the man conducting the interviews, meaning he gets to drive this plot in real time. Lake Mungo has this eerie feeling all throughout its runtime, and the grounded nature of its story, assimilating itself into a filmmaking technique that we so often associate with non-fiction work, is what really aids that feeling more than anything else. I mentioned before that Lake Mungo follows a family trying to deal with the death of their daughter Alice. The cause of her death was drowning, and this happened when she went swimming with her family in Ararat, or however you say that. After this horrific, devastating incident, the son of the family, Matthew Palmer, sets up video equipment around the house to potentially capture sightings of Alice's ghost. I want to quickly touch on the opening of this film as well, because it shows this photograph that's taken post-documentary, containing the 3 living members of the Palmer family as they stand outside of their home. This photo is incredibly important, so while I'm not going to touch on it much more right now, just keep an extra close eye on it. After consulting a psychic called Ray Kemeny, he's unable to give them any clarification on the sightings that they've gathered, which only further compels this family to believe that this is an occurrence like no other. When it comes to the horror in Lake Mungo, it handles itself so well. Rarely does it go the route of trying to, jump scare you, and I'd actually go as far and say that unless you're trying to move the goalposts on what a jump scare is, Lake Mungo has none. Because every ounce of horror in this movie is done in the background. It's all dependent on what you pick up on. On top of that, there's also the horror of realization that comes over time when the narrative unfolds. In so many instances, there's a shocking or horrific moment that will make itself known. Such as, I don't know, the realization that in a hoaxed photograph in which Alice was doctored in order to stage a paranormal event, her spirit is actually there. And what I find more than genius about this revelation is that this isn't one of those instances where they've added it in post so that it's a surprise for everyone. Eagle-eyed viewers who gave this photo a second look when it first showed up on screen would have seen that real ghost the first time around. But most casual audience members won't look at that and won't notice that because that's not what we're being told to focus in on. From the start of the movie, Alice's family have been led to believe that they are being haunted by Alice, or at least the mother and father are. Which is in all accounts believable. This is likely a conclusion that a lot of grieving families come to in order to help with the grief. The revelation of this twist is such a downbeat moment. You can see in the actors as they deliver these performances, as they reflect on the discovery, this feeling of pure helplessness as they realise they've been chasing the ghost of a ghost. When researching this movie, there was an interesting term that I came across, and that term is pareidolia, which by definition is the tendency to perceive a specific, often meaningful image in a random or ambiguous visual pattern. See for example the likes of a Rorschach test. For me, that's something that Lake Mungo constantly calls back to, searching for shapes in the darkness, which is what it tends to become at times as we watch these drawn out stages of footage from a hallway or a bedroom. Any sighting we're shown is purposely ambiguous, meant to play on that idea that our mind could truly just be playing tricks on us, as we know it to do so often. At some stage in the movie, Matthew Palmer, the son of the family, reveals to the audience that he has hoaxed these sightings. And this was done in an attempt to give his mother some closure on the death of her daughter, because it's established that she did not go and identify the body of Alice, it was only the father, meaning that while he got the closure that he needed perhaps, the mother didn't, so she has left with this tremendous guilt. And I think it's honestly interesting, because it's easy to look back on how heartbreaking this must be for the parents learning that their son was behind it all, but knowing the reasoning that he had behind doing it, I think that just adds an interesting layer to this family dynamic. Because for him, this was his way of grieving, this was his way of coping with things. However, the story isn't as cut and dry as this. There is a further layer that this movie U-turns into. Another twist, if you will. When giving the doctored footage a further look, the Palmer family finds a moment where Alice's bedroom is searched by their neighbour Brett. But this also isn't a revelation to the audience, because earlier on in the movie where this is showed to us for the first time, Brett is visible. Now, very faintly, you would probably realistically have to pause this to actually, see it long enough to spot him. But Brett is there. After a thorough search of her daughter's room, June finds a videotape that shows Alice in a sexual encounter with both Brett and his wife. And to further open up the story and add a second twist to the whole thing, it's revealed that Ray had actually met with Alice a few months prior to her death, and she had come to him and confessed that she was having dreams, and those dreams were about her drowning. This is the turning point of the movie, that moment in every film where you're starting to question everything you're seeing. The question of, is there really a supernatural element here, seemingly has been answered at this point, because Alice is having premonitions of her death. It then also begs the question of if there's more to Matthew's hoax than he is letting on. Alice's boyfriend soon enters the fold as well. He shows the family a video he'd taken on his phone of a school trip he'd been on with Alice to Lake Mungo. And in the footage, Alice is shown burying something at the base of a tree. The family, literally desperate for answers at this point, decides to travel to Lake Mungo. They find that tree, and as a result they found the burial spot, and when they uncover it, they find a few odd little trinkets of Alice's, as well as her mobile phone. Now, the phone is something that is established to us earlier as something Alice claimed to have lost. So instantly this casts a shadow of mystery over her character, as we realise that this is one of potentially many things that she had been keeping from her family. On the phone is without a doubt one of the best scares in horror, in my opinion. It's also probably the most chilling moment of this film. There's a video on the phone with Alice filming as she walks along the shoreline, coming across a figure in the darkness.
I feel like I can't do anything.
She approaches this figure and realises that not only is it a version of herself, it's a doppelganger resembling a corpse, with a bloated, disfigured face appearing just as her body would inevitably turn up in the lake. Now this scare is done so incredibly well that I can almost guarantee you have not got the same experience seeing it just now as you would have watching the movie. But I genuinely do think this is one of the best orchestrated scares in a horror film, at least from the 2000s. And following this discovery, the Palmer family just moves out, feeling that this is the only option, and from their point of view, they felt that Alice was doing this in an attempt to let them know who she really was, as well as the things that she had seen at the lake that night. They fully believed that the haunting was over and Alice's ghost had moved on. This was what the Palmers were hoping could be a fresh start. The ending implies this feeling of hope, this feeling of optimism for the Palmer family. Well, for 3 of them at least. Do you remember that photograph that I mentioned earlier on? You know, the one that plays at the start of the film? With everything you now know about Lake Mungo and the twists and turns it likes to pull, it probably comes as next to no surprise to you that this also has something hidden inside of it. Because Alice's spirit is in this photo too. It's in the window watching the family as they leave. The Palmers moved on, choosing that the best way to do so was literally to move homes and start fresh. And to them, by all means, this was a success. As said by June in the film's closing stages, they'd started to feel like a family again. They believed with all their heart that they'd put Alice's spirit to rest because the haunting seemed to have ended. But the revelation of the spirit in this photo implies that Alice's troubles were far from solved. And it's here that we realise that while we've been following the victims that were the Palmer family throughout this movie, we're now only left with one victim, and that is Alice. Her family has had that closure. Her mother has finally had that chance to say goodbye. They've moved on, and as a result they can't feel her anymore, but she's still just as present. This imagery of her watching them leave adds one final brutal layer of tragedy onto Lake Mungo's already unsettling narrative. Now, I really like the comparison that you can draw from this with earlier on in the movie, because like I said before, the father identified the body of Alice, meaning he got that chance to confirm the death for himself and in a way move on. June didn't have that. She chose not to go to identify the body, and as a result she had been left festering with that guilt. The events that have transpired in the movie gave her that chance to do what her husband had done. So in this ending situation, June has taken the role of Alice's father, and Alice has taken the role of her mother, with only one of them really getting to move on. This is only further pushed in the ending because if this photograph is the knife in the gut, what I'm about to tell you next is that hand that reaches for the knife and twists. There's this moment we watch June spending her last few moments in Alice's room, and this is completely normal. You know, she's obviously reminiscing about the memories of her daughter for one last time. However, even this has its own gut-wrenching twist. While we watch this moment, the footage is intercut with a tape from Alice's appointment with Ray, where she's describing a dream in which her mother enters her room. But what strikes Alice as odd is that her mother doesn't speak. She doesn't even acknowledge Alice, instead just standing in silence. She's not seeing Alice because Alice isn't there. Now this is another premonition. This is us discovering that not only did Alice see herself as a corpse on the shore that night, she'd also envisioned how life after her death was going to go. We're seeing June spend her final moments in this room alone, but at the same time we're being told of Alice's experience being in this room with her at this time. And at the end of it all, Alice is left in the house, watching her family leave. She is alone. That one thing that we all fear, and the one thing that she had feared for so long before everything happened. Lake Mungo is a slow-burning masterclass in storytelling that really challenges what a haunting can be in film. There's no high-octane scares here. It's a tragedy more than it is a jump scare reel. As Joel Anderson said it, it's a true exploration of grief that asks so many questions, with one of the many of them being, how well do you really know someone? Now that someone in question is clearly Alice, a girl who seemingly had a lot more under her wing than we had been let on to. This movie treats its audience with the utmost respect. It doesn't hide anything from us. It shows everything as clear as it can instead of adding things into photo for later sudden reveals. People scanning these are going to see every hidden detail. They're going to see 2 depictions of Alice in the backyard photograph. And I really appreciate the dedication and care taken to make sure everything fits the puzzle perfectly. The audience can dissect the film in their own time, meaning that it all just comes down to what they pick up on in the moment. And despite the fact I've revealed some of the film's twists and turns, there's still so much that I decided not to touch upon, because if I've inspired you to watch this, I want there to be something that you're surprised by, and there's certainly still a few things. If you do decide to watch it, just a word of advice, sit through the credits because it adds another layer of the narrative, and the post-credit scene that comes right at the end just adds one final enigmatic layer of thought as we close the curtains on the most tragic horror movie you've likely never seen. Hello, thank you so much for watching this. This video is a lot different from the usual Media 13 content, so I would appreciate it if you've made it this far to leave a like to let me know if you enjoyed it or not. On top of that, if you don't want to miss out on future videos, including the other 2 found footage films that are coming this month, then you can subscribe. It's totally free and you can undo that if you change your mind later on down the line. As it's October, I feel it's appropriate to ask a Halloween related question. So with that in mind, as well as letting me know if you've seen Lake Mungo, also be sure to get down in the comments and let me know the following. What's your favourite underrated scary movie? With that being said, my name has been Jordan, this has been another Media 13 video, and I'll see you all next week.